Bonjour Toby, welcome to this first episode of Journey to French Fluency. Um, I think I'd like to start by asking you to introduce yourself a little bit, and then I'll tell you a little bit about how we got to meet. But you go ahead and tell us about yourself.
D'accord. Eh bien, merci de m'avoir invité, Alex. Yeah, so my name is Toby Bromfield. I am 26 and I am currently a French teacher. But I did language studies at university, etc. Some translation as well. And I effectively just live and breathe languages. I think we share lots of commonalities about language learning and goals and how to get there.
Yeah, yeah, and I'll tell everyone watching and listening. I think the reason why I was really super excited to invite you and you first of all those that I wanted to invite is that I think all the English speakers that I've met over the years, they all have that dream of becoming fluent in French. And I keep thinking, is there one person that I can think of who'd be the perfect spy who could live in France and pass for a Frenchman or woman without a bit of an accent or anything that's going to give it away? And I think you're pretty much the only person that I can think of where you don't have one bit of an accent when you speak French. And the craziest thing is I think you're super young. And when I met you a few years ago, I don't know how long ago it was.
Mm.
I don't know, I, maybe
I
10
must have
years
been, I
ago.
think the first time I must have been possibly even maybe 20 or even 19, I think, when first on YouTube years ago. Yeah.
Right. And it's funny because I was thinking, when we first exchanged messages, I think I just launched my YouTube channel and I think it was at the end of 2015. And at the time,
Mm.
I just thought, oh, I'd like to create one video, first video, which would be like a crazy, crazy good video teaching people French. So I came up with that what I call advanced French. Some people argue it's not advanced. I think it is, but it doesn't matter really. And I think you were one of the first ones to send me a message and say, "This is so good. This is crazy. How come you only have like 20 views and 4 followers?"
Yeah, yeah, I remember. I remember, yeah, because that was the early kind of days of YouTube, when language learning was just kicking off in those kind of platforms before it was properly utilized. And the videos then were often basic tutorials, or people just showing off about how many languages they speak. But your videos were so interesting, especially at that kind of young time. I remember that advanced French video, and you basically said, forget what all the language teachers tell you. This is what you should do. You know, you kind of taught the real language, which was really refreshing because most people have learned languages in school, which is catering to the masses, which is slightly different to individual language learning.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. So, based on that, I'd like to really know and dig a little deeper into your journey learning French. What was it like? Did you start with a passion for French or did it come later? And how did it start, I would say?
Yeah, so, kind of looking at me now, lots of people ask or presume that I've always been brilliant at French, or people think I have French family or something like that, or I lived in France for a long time. But that's not the case. So I did some French at school. I did it for GCSE and up to A level, so that did help. But I got a B in my French A level. So I wasn't by any means, the top of the class or anything like that. Um, I think it was necessary to study it in that context at the time, because it gave me the tools and the interest. But it was actually after I finished school that French and language as a whole kind of came alive. So I knew that at that time, I didn't think I would be that interested in languages as much as I am now. But I thought with the kind of basics that I have, it would be a shame to not take this further. I remember I had a fluent French friend at school, and I was just fascinated by how he could just switch into French. I would ask him, yeah, I'd try and trick him. I'd say like, how do you say, the green unicorn was on the glittery boat and things like this, and trying to like trip him up. I was just amazed. I just thought that's so cool. And I think that brings me back to motivation as well. Lots of people say, you need to be motivated through, through a job. Maybe you need to learn French for a job, or you need to learn French for family, or whatever it might be. But my motivation was just that would be so cool. How cool would that be just to speak another language? So that's the kind of driving force at the beginning. So I went and did a gap year in France as an au pair.
Right after
I
high
was
school.
initially, yeah, exactly, yeah. So that would have been 2016, yes, when I was 18.
Right.
And I went to Grenoble to a family thrown right in the deep end. Um, it was an interesting experience. I was caught up in all their marital problems as well. They seemed to want to offload onto me. So it was an interesting environment to be in, and looking after a 4-year-old and an 8-year-old. It was bizarre. But I then
What was
actually
your
went
French
from
like at that
there.
point when you got there?
So I so there were some bits of vocab that I thought were quite advanced. We'd read Le Petit Prince in school, and obviously we'd gone through lots of vocab. So I remember things like I knew un puits, a well, just randomly, or un
Random.
trou, a
One of
hole.
the
Yeah,
most
things
useless
like that.
words you'll know,
I
well.
know, I know. I haven't used it since. But in terms of actually generating those sentences and especially comprehension, I was quite weak. Which is hard again when you're 18 without experience to then go into a situation where you kind of have to suddenly parent effectively as an au pair, taking them to school in all these different situations. It was hard, but I think the thing that really brought on my French was context, and I often say this. I'll get onto this because I then moved from that family to another family through the website Au Pair World. I wanted to leave this family; it wasn't going very well, and I got a message from a effectively three French gay aristocrats in a 15th century chateau in Lyon, and I thought this is an advert. This is not right. But I decided to go for a kind of trial day, and I stayed for about 7 or 8 months. So that was where I worked a lot of my French. So I was living there, and effectively they had one son, 8-year-old, who was lovely, Jules Pierre, and I was effectively his professional friend. So yeah, I did everything with the family, from any soirees they went to taking them to school. I went to a language school in Lyon. Um, so that's how that started. And I think one of the key elements and piece of advice I would give in terms of language learning related to that is context. So I often give the example of the word arrosoir, a watering can. Completely random bit of vocab, and if that was on a list of things to learn, you'd never learn it because it has no relation to your life. But I had to water about 250 plants every morning.
There you
So the
go.
word
You don't ex
arrosoir,
It's not like you plan on things like that, it just
yeah,
happens.
uh-huh,
Yeah.
absolutely. And when you're doing things all the time, you go for that haircut in France. And so the scissors and the hair dryer and all these different things, mesh and all the, highlights, whatever you want to get done, they have a grounding, they have an emotional response as well. If you might have an argument or you might see something or you might hit, all of these things have senses, they have emotions, they have memories and experiences. So those bits of vocab just naturally kind of stick in your head.
Hmm.
And in any case, it's the things you're doing every day that are the things that you need to say. So with the repetition of doing those things, those are the words precisely that you need to remember and that you will remember. Um, so yeah, that's kind of how that started. And then after France, I started a degree in French. I started off with French and business at Reading University in England. And I decided I wanted to pursue more languages. So I was having a think about what to do. So I did a few extra credits in Italian. I've always loved Italian history, Roman history. It's something I wanted to actually study at university. So I thought that was a natural step. So I started doing that, and I realized very quickly that I was loving these lessons in Italian, and I was hating going to business school. I mean, our head lecturer did the timetables for National Rail for the rail service. You can imagine how how fascinating those lectures were. I decided to change my degree halfway through the year. So I spoke to the department and I said, I really like this Italian thing. Can I change it to French and Italian? And they said, no. It's halfway through the year. You've never done Italian before. Everyone else has been doing 6 hours of Italian per week. They're already advancing because they need to get up to the level of people that have been doing it all throughout school. You know, you've got a 4-year degree, etc. And I said, okay, if you give me the book, if I teach myself what you guys have done, and I do the test with you in a few weeks' time, if I pass that, can I do it? And I did, and I got the highest mark on it. And they said, okay, come and do Italian then. um, and that was purely because for me it wasn't a subject, it wasn't work. It was, I mean, I was staying up till 3 in the morning just page turning this
Yeah,
thing because I
it's
couldn't I
something you
couldn't
would
get
have done for
enough.
fun anyway.
Oh yeah, it was absolutely. I
Yeah.
mean, it was getting late and I had a lecture in the morning. Turn the page, I'd be like, right, I need to finish now. And then it would be, how to tell the time. And I think, well, I can't go to sleep without knowing how to tell the time in Italian. Come on.
That sounds so much
So
like me.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, so it was just, and it was such big interest because my only linguistic frame of reference before that in terms of foreign language was French.
Hmm.
So discovering that there's a completely new way of saying things and more similarities with English, other similarities, differences. I was just, yeah, I was enthralled. So I did that. So I did 4-year degree, and the third year was in France. So it was a Erasmus year. It was supposed to be half the time in France, half the time in Italy. And that was a crucial year because those that hadn't studied Italian previously, like myself, that was the kind of catch-up year. You're in the country, you're able to do university or something like that, and you're able to kind of catch up. And the way it happened was France went first. So I went to Poitiers, which I chose. Everyone asked, why did you go to Poitiers? There's only a Futuroscope and nothing much else. But I liked it. I thought it was great.
Everyone
I
says
like the,
that,
yeah.
my year that I spent as an exchange in Memphis, Tennessee. A lot of people, who love Elvis or who are interested
Uh-huh.
in different things will say, there's a lot to Memphis and it's the United States anyway. And people from Memphis say, why would you come to Memphis of all places in the world? Like it's the
Yeah,
worst place in the
yeah,
world.
yeah, yeah.
And
Well,
I'm
it's
sure Portuguese is nice.
sometimes it's those smaller places as well that I kind of prefer to the
Hmm.
to the big cities, the Paris and things like that. In Poitiers, you go into a bar and you're the only English guy,
Right. And
and that's
nobody's
quite
going to speak
fun.
English to you as opposed to Paris where
Yeah.
people,
Uh-huh. Yeah,
so
exactly.
was better.
So yeah, that was great. I went there actually, then met my ex there as well, and that obviously that could be a whole other podcast, I think there. That can help with language learning as well. Um, and then so I was supposed to go to Italy after that, after the 6 months, everything ready, bags packed, and then COVID hit. So unfortunately, I couldn't then go to Italy. Um, so I kind of continued through that summer doing bits of Italian at home by myself. And that's where again, almost like when I left after school and went to pursue French, this time it was me teaching myself Italian, and that's again when everything picked up. So I mainly called people. That was my kind of unique way of language learning for me was speaking. Now I know there are lots of polyglots that advocate for no speaking. I know Steve Kaufman, for example, no speaking at the beginning. You haven't got enough of the language. It's all input and reading, and yeah, lots of other kind of main polyglots often say that. For me, it was the opposite. I never really read anything. It was purely through speaking. So I
But
did that a lot
would you
with.
say that you managed to do that because of your knowledge of French and French grammar, maybe? And would you have been
I
able to do that without knowing French?
That's a good question. So after I finished my A levels with French, I did the exact same thing. I used an app called Tandem. I must be one of the first users of that app. It's been like 10 years now, and it's got thousands and thousands of people on there. But back in the day, yeah, there weren't too many people using it. But yeah, I would just find people on there and just speak all day long, be it messages. For me, I think if you can write and reply, so message in a language, it's you can speak and you can understand. I feel like it's the same kind of competences. If you're able to express yourself, it can kind of transmit across different media like that. So that's what I did day in, day out. And I think that the French definitely helps the Italian because they're so similar.
Hmm.
Um, but also there are differences, and it happened with French at the beginning, and I had no point of reference apart from English. Um, so I think it's kind of relative. But I did that mainly over the summer with Italian. I did my final year without having gone to Italy, and I was the only one out of the entire course who wasn't able to go to Italy because I was the only one that did French and Italian. Lots of others did Spanish and Italian,
Hmm.
and it just so happened the way it was done that you had to go to France first. So they all went to Italy first and missed out on Spain. So yeah, and then I did my final year, and again, just because I just loved the language. I ended up getting the highest grade at the university in French and Italian. I then went on to do a master's in translation in at Leeds University. Um, so audiovisual translation, so kind of subtitling things like that. And I managed to get the highest mark on the in the department for that as well. Not necessarily for anything other than I just loved it.
Yeah,
And I think when you love something like that, yeah, there's no kind of limit to where you want to explore it. There's no kind of reading list. It kind of engulfs your life, I would say.
right. How do you feel about
So
your
yeah.
Italian compared to your French? Because I mean, I want to have you speak French because everybody's wondering how good is your French, and I'll tell you, perfect. So, I mean, you can tell us in French, by the way. How would you compare your Italian versus your French?
That's a very good question. So
Français, si tu veux.
my ok, tu veux que je dise en français?
Ouais, vas-y,
Ok,
vas-y.
donc du coup, mon italien, en fait, je parlais pas mal italien quand je faisais quand j'étais à la fac, mais le truc, c'est que maintenant, j'ai une copine brésilienne. Et donc, du coup, on parle presque tous les jours en portugais. Et donc, maintenant, je trouve que j'ai perdu un peu mon italien. Mais à l'époque, et aussi mon français est un peu plus brouillé qu'avant, mais à l'époque, mon français était meilleur que mon italien, ça c'est vrai. Mais c'est juste parce que j'avais plus d'expérience avec le français. Mais petit à petit, je voyais que mon italien s'améliorait beaucoup. Et enfin, j'ai travaillé comme traducteur d'italien. Je traduisais des interviews et tout, et des vidéos. Donc voilà, mon italien, c'était pas mal. Et j'ai passé après la fac, j'ai passé 3 mois en Italie. Et donc là, j'ai vraiment découvert le pays, la culture et tout. Et ouais, je dirais que voilà, mon italien n'était pas exactement au même niveau que mon français, mais c'était pas trop loin. Mais maintenant, je dirais que la langue que je parle, à part le français et l'italien, la mieux, ce serait le portugais, parce que je parle en portugais tous les jours. Donc, c'est
So,
maintenant le portugais yeah, Portuguese is now kind of bumped up to second place. Yeah.
yeah, okay, so yeah, everybody can see and hear how good your French is. It's just insane. But so Portuguese is now pretty much almost as good as your French.
Oh, it's so hard to tell. Just because I've had so much more experience. So again, they all follow the same kind of line. So Portuguese, when I was living in Italy, I had two Angolan housemates. They spoke very good Italian, but Portuguese is their native language. And for the last kind of couple of weeks that I was there, I just thought, oh, let's just start learning some Portuguese. And I started off, so this was the first time where I started off a language completely by myself. So no school, no university, just me and why not? And so it turns out I just started off with grammar. I probably like you, just really like grammar.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I was looking up grammar tables and tenses, and basically in one day, I just went through the present, the past, imperfects, subjunctives, everything.
And you could go
And
faster
tried
because you knew about, French and Italian. Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, the more languages that you learn, the more, yeah, the much quicker the process is.
Yeah.
Even if they don't necessarily have anything to do with each other, you know how to learn. It just becomes much more efficient as well. But yeah, Portuguese super similar to French and Italian, so that was very quick. I kind of stopped and then met my girlfriend now last year, And at the beginning, her English was much better than my Portuguese, but I just wanted to speak in Portuguese, and she didn't really want to speak in English too much. And I just didn't mind about, I always used to ask her every kind of couple of weeks, how old am I now in Portuguese? Am I 4? Am I 5? Am I 6? And I'm like, yeah, I'm 7 today, because you're like a child. You can't express yourself properly, you'll have an argument and you'll lose quite a few times. And it's about how much you care about that. I didn't really care. If I hear a word once, I'm in a situation, I'll just try and say it. I might completely butcher it, and a word that I heard last week, and someone will look at me like, "What?" And I'll give it another go. Oh, you mean this? And as opposed to asking, "Oh, how do you say this?" or maybe being a bit tentative to speak, I'll just start speaking and make all the
Yeah.
mistakes.
Yeah, and I think I've
Um,
always been that way too, is that I've never been scared of making mistakes. And I'm just hoping
mhm,
people will correct me, because if they don't, then I'm just going to memorize the wrong use of it, or,
mhm,
mispronounce. Um,
yeah.
okay. And going back to your experience learning French, when you first came to France as an au pair, how much could you understand or not understand? And say versus speak versus comprehend.
Mhm. Yeah, so I had done like in the couple of months before going, I'd done my kind of personal research and things like that. So I knew the things like, not just the way that you learn at school. I knew the things like dropping the ne to say like je sais pas instead of je ne sais pas. Things like that I was already starting to get a little bit more acquainted with real French, and using on instead of nous and things like that. But honestly, it wasn't great. I mean, I remember distinctly being there for, gosh, it must have been a couple of months, which is a long time to be fully immersed. The kids didn't speak any English, parents didn't really want to speak any English. And I remember taking one of the boy to a party. I was sitting at the table with all the parents, and they were talking. It must have been about 25 minutes. They were talking in French. And I kid you not, I didn't get one word, not one word. I remember thinking to myself, surely a word is going to crop up that I'm going to know at some point. And I didn't get a single word. And it's just how you deal with that. I think the thing with me was kind of confidence, fake it till you make it. So I would have this mentality of, I speak fluently, I do, even though I didn't. But I would kind of kid myself into thinking I did. And it's that false confidence where you just go into a situation and think, oh, I can do that, that's fine, instead of being tentative. And then before you know it, you just kind of wake up one day and you're actually closer to that goal than you thought. And it kind of happens without you realizing.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, but it wasn't it
Can you
wasn't
remember
it
like
wasn't great when I first started.
right, but can you remember of times when, because it's happened to me in Spanish or in English, where something comes out of my mouth and I surprise myself. I'm like, wow, that came so naturally. I don't even know why I
Yeah,
said that word or that expression. But
yeah, I mean, and that happens a lot as well with Portuguese now because I'm learning it in a context where I'm not learning it from a book, I'm not learning it written, lots of it's spoken. No one's telling me the kind of rules, and I think that's one of the things that I love about languages. And when you have one of those moments, it is so gratifying. It's when a word slips out that you haven't even learnt its translation in your language. You've learnt it fully in the foreign context. You've
yeah.
understood it fully in the foreign context, and then you've regurgitated it fully in the foreign context. And that I find really cool. I remember, so for example, a good example is using maybe the little kind of colloquialisms like enfin, things like that. You hear people saying, eh ben, enfin, enfin, c'était pas, enfin, voilà, quoi. Like little things like that.
Yeah.
And you're not going to kind of look that up and be like, what does, I don't even know how to spell fin when you hear it. But, when you hear lots of people saying it, you'd say, without knowing the rules, you'd just start speaking. Yeah, I remember that. And then I tutored French as well afterwards. And I'd have to put together all these things I knew into the rules. I had to backtrack and think, oh, what are the translations? What are the rules? So I'd
Yeah.
often say to my students, ben and enfin. Ben starts a sentence, like, qu'est-ce que t'as pensé du film? Eh ben, je pense que blah, blah, blah. And then enfin is like a translation of well that kind of contradicts what you're talking about. C'était bien, enfin, c'était pas génial, mais it kind of goes back on what you're saying.
And
But you
I've thought
don't
about
learn it.
those, how to translate those so much that enfin I would say, I mean.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a good one.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And there are so many of those in French. So
I
many
can
of
tell you
them.
one in English that boggled my mind for a while. It's at some point I was trying to listen to English, and I listened to Americans, I think, and I heard people put the word though at the end of the sentence. I was thinking that sounds so
Mm.
cool, but and then I look it up in the dictionary. It says quoique, like I don't think that's what it means. You don't end a sentence with
Yeah,
quoique,
yeah,
though.
yeah, yeah,
It's just a different use
yeah,
of though, and it
yeah.
sounded so natural. And I heard it all the time, and it bugged me because I couldn't tell what it was really, and I was thinking I think I kind of get it, but I don't think I'd be able to use it. And then I heard it so many times that after a while I thought, oh, it naturally came to me, and I thought I think I can do it. But
Yeah,
that's
absolutely. And that's why it can be so much more gratifying when you learn a language yourself and you find out how you learn it because those moments happen. I mean, that's a brilliant example that a dictionary or even someone else wouldn't have been able to give you the context because it's impossible. That word is used in so many different contexts that you
right.
just have to hear it. A good example in French is quand même,
Quand
which I
même.
love.
Yeah.
Quand même is great. And if you look it up in a dictionary, I bet you it will say something like even so
Right.
or something like that.
It
And
doesn't
no,
work
I
most of the
don't.
time. That's
I
not
never
what it
say
is.
even so. No,
No.
exactly. And also, you might say it in situations like, someone does something in front of you, and you go, "Ah, wait, quand même."
Yeah.
But you're not going to say, "Ah, even so."
It doesn't make any sense.
No, so it's used in so many different situations. And you pick up those things, and the way you speak, it's not just, I'm different in Portuguese as I am in French as I am in Italian and English. The way you can express yourself. That's why I loved French so much as well. English is it's debatable about how you express yourself, but I think English can be a bit more subdued, reserved language. It can be very expressive when it wants to be in terms of its words, but the way that it expresses its words, I think, is quite reserved. Whereas in French, I find is so much more expressive. Things like it's the sounds. You're in a park and you hear someone say, "Oh, oh, eh, oh, Bastien, oh, viens là," or like things like that. I'm not going to say that in English, or like someone saying something, "Oh, la 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 la." Like, when are you gonna say that? Like these little sounds
Yeah.
and the facial expressions. Like, I remember I came back from France and my mum asked me something, and I went. She was like, "Did you just spit at me? What are you doing?" And I was like, "Sorry." It's just, I sometimes still do that. Things carry over. I sometimes still do that in English, where I sometimes go like that, and it kind of almost looks rude, but it's so much more expressive. Little things like up, tac, up là, oula.
Right.
That's another one as well. I do that in class, like oula.
Yeah.
And you don't have those things in English. And the door is opened, and none of those things are on a vocab sheet.
Yeah.
You hear them and you understand them within that context, and then you reproduce. That's why I like the speaking elements so much, the speaking and listening, as opposed to the reading and writing, because you don't get those through the written. But it depends on what your goals are.
Right.
It
And where
depends
you are in your journey.
why you're learning a language. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. I would say, based on my experience, meeting thousands of students, and I don't know what you would say, but I think I would say about 10% of people are like you in the sense that they can just pick up a language on their own, really. I
Hmm.
would say no more than 10%, something around, 10%. And so those people, they can just listen to French or Italian, Spanish,
Hmm.
and then just pick it up. They somehow figure it out. There's like a fifth sense for the language,
Hmm.
and they just figure things out. While most other people would not be able to do that, and even more than that, you can put people in immersion, and after a year, someone like you will be fluent, and other people after 20 years will
Hmm.
not be able to speak. And I've met plenty of people who have been in France for
Yeah.
20 years, they can't speak.
Yeah.
Do you think it has to do with how proactive you are, natural abilities, how much work you put into it? What do you think it is?
I think it's a combination of factors. I think there is a natural kind of um, linguistic ability that some people have. Some people are just born to like maths.
Yeah.
Other people, music, sport, things like that. So I think there is an innate kind of, I guess, talent, if you want to think about it that way. But I think that can be unmined completely if it's not utilized. And I know people who have definitely not got that, and they are speaking fluently. So I don't think it's the be all and end all at all. I think the success that one has, first of all, you can't be afraid. That's the number one thing. You cannot be afraid to make mistakes. I know everyone says it, but it's so important, and it's not just to make mistakes, but it's actively wanting to be in a situation where you make mistakes.
Hmm.
So, going out to that event, deciding to do this, deciding to whatever it might be, that puts you in a vulnerable position. Language learning is vulnerability.
But I
Um,
think also accept, criticism or being corrected, and you
yeah,
want to be corrected if you make a mistake.
yeah,
I
hmm
just one thing that comes to my mind is a lot of English speakers, when they end a lesson over the year, they said, what did they say again? Something like à tout de suite. I was saying, no, that means
hmm
see you in a bit. So that means, in today. I'm not
uh-huh.
in today. And so
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
they say à tout à l'heure.
À tout à
No,
l'heure,
people
à
say
tout
à
à
tout
l'heure.
à l'heure.
Yeah,
Like, no, not à
yeah,
tout à
à tout à
l'heure.
l'heure.
See you in a bit.
Yeah,
C'est
yeah,
à plus. À bientôt. Yeah.
yeah. Because we'd say see you later, even though we're not going to see you later.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so do you feel like it was a struggle at first when you came to France, understanding people in the end?
Yeah.
It's
I
scary.
think, yeah, it was. I think call it a benefit or a disadvantage. The fact that I was young, not young in the sense that I was more like a sponge. I could pick things up, not that young. I mean, I was 18, 19 when I went to France. So a kind of an adult really mentally at the time. But young in the sense that I was kind of expected, I was already vulnerable. So I was going into situations already, even things like taking trains around places was still kind of a bit of a fear in a foreign country. So I was constantly I was used to things being new, me not knowing how to do something. So, so the language was just another part of that. If you go to France at, 30 with a job and a wife, and then you're trying to learn it, you're kind of expected. You're a bit established, you know who you are and things like that. And suddenly, have the linguistic age of a 6-year-old in French can be a
Right.
bit of a shock to the system. So I think yeah, I think that was an advantage. But yeah, when I went there, it did take some months. I also think another interesting point. You talk about my accent in French, and I think that's a really interesting line of questioning because I personally think that there isn't necessarily a correlation between how well you speak a language and your accent. I
True.
think if you can
I
get
agree.
both, then brilliant. And
Us.
that's interesting. I mean, I had Italian lecturers at uni that just spoke with the very like they were rolling all their R's the whole time, but their English was impeccable. I
Yeah.
mean, the expressions and the things they would say, they spoke better than I did,
Hmm.
but it was very, very strong, an accent. So I think accent's another part of language learning. Again, what are your goals? I wanted to sound like, whenever I learn a language, I want to sound like a native.
Hmm.
I also had a musical background, I played piano by ear. So I had that kind of ear that helps with just by chance, that helps with kind of musicality and language and things like that.
I think
And
there's really a correlation
noticing
between the two because I'm the same. I can
that,
just
yeah,
listen, and I could always do that. I love music. I can listen to a tune and play it on piano and guitar, but
yeah,
I never like reading music. I'm like, you don't read music, you
yeah.
listen to it.
No, exactly. No, exactly. Yeah, I never did lessons, and I'm the same as you. If I hear it, I just play it. So I did like jazz piano and things like that, and yeah, yeah. So you can see similarities there. Exactly, these different competencies are very similar. But I think if you don't have a native like accent, I don't think there's any problem with that at all.
Yeah.
It's just a
If
goal.
Right. I mean, I think so many people would be really thrilled if they could have a conversation, hold a conversation with someone. That would be the ultimate goal for a lot of people, which makes
Hmm
sense. Ultimately, I think we speak languages not only for the fun of it, even though it's fun, but also to be able to communicate with people who have a different culture, point of view, perspective on everything, and that's
Yeah,
fascinating. And so, yeah, again, I've also met a lot of French people who spoke English with the thickest French accent, but they were completely fluent. They said whatever they wanted, not
yeah,
an issue.
yeah. I think that, and they're different experiences as well. That is something I would say. They are different experiences when you have a native life accent and when you don't. I mean, when I was in France, or I'm in France, and meet new people or go to bars or talk to people, often they think I'm French until I'll either slip up on something, or I'll speak in English, or something will happen, and that's quite a fun position to be in. It's first of all, it's very gratifying because every time you meet someone new, they go, "Oh, you sound like a French," and that's great. You kind of it spurs you on, but also it's because you get an insight into what it's like to kind of be a French person in that kind of context. You kind of you're again faking it till you make it, but you kind of are in these social settings as a kind of fly on the wall, where you're kind of invisible. They don't kind of realize, and that's important as well, I think, for making friends and making communities in other countries. Sometimes, I know people that have spent some time in France, and they just say, "Oh, French people are this and that," and they might be a bit critical, and I couldn't find any French friends. I'd say, okay, but what's your French level like? Because if you're stumbling over your words and you're not making much of an effort, and it's really difficult, it's hard for a native to include you in a kind of social group. So it's also about how easy you can make that assimilation and transition between the two cultures and languages. And I think accent is one of those tools that if you are a little bit kind of astute and you pick up on how people are pronouncing things, the way they're pronouncing them, I think it can help in that regard. But it's not the be all and end all at
Right,
all.
right. Have you ever, whether it be for French, Italian, or Portuguese or Spanish, spent any extended period of time listening to Italian on the radio online, like just to hear the language and absorb it?
That's a good one. So I did when before going to France originally, I would listen to French radio, and more than anything, just because it was nice. It was nice to kind of listen to, I kind of let it kind of wash over me, but I didn't really understand any of it.
Does
And
it matter?
it depends what
It's
the
a bit
goals are, but I
frustrating.
don't think so.
Right.
I think it can help with sounds and things like that. I think you have to engage with something in some way. So I mean, some people say that kind of almost hypnotic language learning approach to, you go to sleep with, Voltaire playing in your ears, a nice poem or something like that, and you wake up fluent in French. I think you have to interact with it in some level. So attentive listening or picking apart words or trying to listen to things, I think that is useful. Um, but again, some people might be learning French, listen to French radio, realize they don't understand anything, and be off put by it. So I kind
Right.
of, yeah, I guess it depends how you interact with it.
But
But
I
I
think
never listened to,
even if it's passive, to me, it's better than nothing.
yeah,
I know
yeah,
ideally you want to be proactive and maybe take notes. Oh, I heard that word. Let me look that up. And oh, I understood
hmm
this and that. But again, I know it can be frustrating, but I think that, even if it's passive, you still train your brain and your ears to listen and pick up the accent and the
yeah.
language words, pronunciation patterns and stuff like that. Yeah.
Absolutely. You need to hear the language. As I say, I'm a big proponent of speak from day one. I remember when I started that week in Italy when I started learning Portuguese, after I think the second day, I tried to call someone in Portuguese and I
Nice.
understood nothing. I was like, Olá, tudo bem? And then they said something and I was like, not a clue. But I just completely faked it and I kind of thrived on that uncomfortable, I'm failing kind of a way because I know that I'm going to try this tomorrow and I'm going to get an extra word and then next week I'm going to understand their reply and it kind of goes that way. But yeah, with Italian I never really listened to the sounds that much, but with Portuguese I did because when I started learning Portuguese I just thought I have no idea how it sounds. I couldn't even do a Portuguese accent in English. I didn't know.
Yeah.
So you have to listen to it to get those sounds.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
interestingly, I started off with an Italian accent in Portuguese because you can have three different ways to pronounce it. Like the word door, you can say porta, or you can say porta or porta. So there's three kind of different accents. I started off the more Italian-y one. Since my girlfriend is from Rio, after a couple of months, I then got the Rio accent. I completely changed my way of pronouncing things just because we spoke like that. So
It's pretty
you
different,
do
right?
end up, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. It's the kind of erro
Do you
puxado.
feel do you feel neutral between like Portuguese from Portugal or Brazil, or do you feel like you've got enough experience with one of the two so that the other one sounds different, if not strange, and that it sounds artificial when you try to speak that way, or
So the Portuguese I learned was Brazilian Portuguese and specifically kind of Rio, the Carioca kind of accent. And I've been to Portugal loads and loads and loads of times. I spent my whole summer in Portugal this year, etc. So I know Porto especially quite well. The Portuguese from Portugal is very, very different. It's the same kind of language on paper, but I mean, grammar's different. I mean, in Brazil, you use the equivalent of vous for the formal and the informal. But in Portugal, it's much more strict. It's the tu and vous kind of thing, and it's very, the way that you place words is super strict. Brazilian Portuguese is kind of like, it's fine. It's much more relaxed. Portugal Portuguese is very much more staccato and a lot more kind of difficult to understand, but I'm a bit more used to it now. But they are very different, and that was hard after, gosh, maybe 2 months or so of learning it, and then went straight to Portugal and thrown in the deep end, um, and that was last year. Uh-huh.
So to me, it's mind-blowing when you compare French and the types of French that are spoken, and mainly the French spoken in Europe versus the French spoken in Canada, and you compare
Mm,
English spoken in the UK versus English spoken in the US, and Spanish spoken in Spain versus in the US, and you see
mhm,
such similar patterns. It is
mhm,
scary, and
mhm,
yet
mhm,
those languages don't really. I mean, there's no any sort of interaction really. Even when you
mhm,
think of the Spanish speakers in South America by people who have never lived in the United States, and yet the grammar, the constructions, the vocabulary is so close to English, while you go to
mhm.
Spain, the constructions, the grammar, the vocabulary is so close to French. And you just wonder how did that
Yeah,
happen? And I'm sure it sounds like that's what it is in Portuguese, based on what you said.
yeah,
Very much
yeah, absolutely.
French.
Yeah, no, no, that is true. That is true. Yeah, there's lots of similarities, almost parallels.
Hmm.
Adjacent parallels. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and even then, talking of kind of linguistic variation, even within France, that was another thing as well, is that learning French at school and even speaking to people in French, you then go there, and I know you often said this in your videos that, there's real French and there's the French that you learn in class. And it's true, and that's another thing I loved as well. I remember we talked about that a few years ago. There's different registers in
Hmm.
French, and that how 1 minute you're kind of speaking with the much more eloquent, longer words. Those it's got such scope French more than English, I'd say. You can
I agree.
really say there's poetic kind of sentences that kind of trickle off the tongue, and then you can go into street slang and verlan and all that kind of stuff. And it's being able to mix those two. And I just absolutely loved that. I loved going to France and, going into a bar and wesh chacal, ça dit quoi, bien ou quoi, like that. And they'd be like, who is this English guy? What is going on?
Yeah.
And I
There's
loved
a huge
playing with
variety
those
for such a
registers.
small country, right?
Yeah, 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 yeah,
Huge variety.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I know in my course I try to be somewhat conservative in the sense that I try to be careful when I teach something that's informal or slang. I try to think, okay, who says that? I don't want an 80-year-old woman to go speak like a 20-year-old boy, you know?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
but sometimes so I try to be conservative and say, okay, up to my generation, I often say that. Up to my generation, people will say that word. And then
Uh-huh.
next thing I talked to a 75-year-old man from France, and he's going to use all that slang that I say, that are,
Yeah,
me and my generation and the younger ones would use. So
yeah,
it's just that the French use tons of informal French, tons of colloquial and slang,
yeah.
tons of it.
It is crazy. I mean, people that haven't learned French just think it's this eloquent language,
Yeah,
la langue de Molière.
yeah,
And then you go to France and it is just, it's so informal, so
yeah.
informal. I mean, you can read a whole sentence and not get anything if you don't know it. Like Verlan is a great one where they swap words, back from the front to the back. And not everyone speaks like that, but you'll still say some words like un truc de ouf or like man meuf or things like that most
Those things
people
have become mainstream, right? Those
use.
expressions and
Yeah,
words. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, yeah, yeah. There's lots of those. And then even if you're watching films, it's kind of accepted that a French person will still be able to decipher it, even if they're, your grandma. You'll still be able to watch a French film and you'll hear kind of street slang. Lots of films that happen in city streets. Same as in the English world, I guess, when you're looking at London crime dramas and things. There are lots of slang. Everyone kind of understands to an extent. So if you want to be able to watch a film, you kind of have to know those verlan as well. Depending on how deep you want to get into the culture.
right.
So yeah, yeah. There's
So
there's
that's
there's a
I
lot of
think that's
stuff.
one thing that's important to notice that. as you go through that journey of becoming fluent, you're gonna learn things simply because you find yourself in a situation where you're gonna hear a word or an expression and you think, I don't know what that means, and somehow you manage to figure it out. And then
Mm.
you come to a point where you realize, well, that was really slang, that was very vulgar. It was really, and so, but you're just glad that you know what it means so that you can understand when you hear it. Doesn't mean that you're
Hmm.
necessarily going to use it. And some people make that confusion, I think, is they say, I don't want to learn that. Well, it's just knowledge. You don't have to use it. But if you want to understand everyone, you need to know it.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, when I speak, and again, it depends who you're speaking to, but I don't use a whole lot of Verlan, for example.
Hmm.
Um, but I know lots of people that do. And if I want to be friends with those people, I have a friend in Paris and he lives with some housemates. And when I go there and it's just all the time.
Yeah.
And otherwise you're not going to know what's going on. So you can't you can't kind of judge a language. A language is there whether you learn it or not. It's there. So you might as well dig into those things. It's not, but for listeners that are learning French and they're like, oh my gosh, need to know Verlan now. It's not the be all and end all. And plus when people speak to you, they're gonna adapt the way that they speak as well. So yeah, in most settings where if you pop to France for the day, you're not going to hear a load of Verlan. But if you go, the bars and things like that, or you're watching specific films and things, then you definitely will. And it's just another layer that will just increase your knowledge of the language. That it never ends. You can keep going. Some people stop at this stage and they can order food and they can understand the response. They can go on holiday. They can get by in their second home, and that's brilliant. Someone else is forget all the Verlan. They're studying for their exams and they've blitzed all the grammar and they're happy. And other people can't write French. They don't know any grammar, but they can understand a film without subtitles because they've been there for the last year speaking to people. So it depends how you want to interact with it, and what your goals are. But if you want to uncover every stone, then yeah, those colloquialisms and slang. There's a lot of them in French. There's a
Yeah,
lot.
yeah.
Yeah.
I always remember when I was about 14, I went to some summer camp. And so I felt like it was the kid who came from that posh neighborhood in Paris. And so I was with other kids who spoke Verlan. And I've never spoken a word of Verlan. And I'm the only person that I know who doesn't speak a word of Verlan. I mean, I just don't speak it.
Hmm.
It doesn't come naturally to me.
Hmm.
These kids were talking. There's that one who turns to me and says, Tu peux me passer mon bouquin à côté de ton yep? And I was like, what? I really had no idea what he was talking about. So you want your book? Where's your book again? So, à côté de ton yep. I was like, where? Où?
Oh,
C'est à côté de ton yep,
yeah.
ton pied. Oh. But so,
Yeah.
my
Those are
parents would
extreme.
not, my parents would not understand a lot of it. The
Mm,
verlan, you have to,
mm.
your mind has to be a little flexible.
Yeah, and it changes, culturally, socially, and with age as well. I mean, someone maybe in their kind of late 30s or 40s above will have that kind of 1980s, 90s kind of Verlan French that maybe we don't use as much now, chômé and things like that maybe people don't say, or like different kind of words they would use. And then much more recently, if you're watching things in the banlieue, then you'll be saying mon ref and things like that for my brother and things. People don't normally speak like that in everyday, but you'll hear all those kind of sounds, faire la teuf, things like that.
I think it comes down to what word, what expression has
Mm,
become mainstream or not.
yeah, yeah. Well, I had a French friend that used to say chez wam,
Yeah,
but he was, again, that's kind of which no one really says now. But
yeah.
like, yeah, it completely depends. And even if it's not Verlan, even outside of that, you do have those slang terms. I mean, like if you're talking a family like mon daron, ma daronne,
Yeah.
you wouldn't, je suis avec mon daron là. And if you don't know that that's, mes parents, mon père, ma mère, then you're going to struggle in those situations. But again, it depends who you're speaking to. And
And as
then
you said,
there's,
it's not like you're not gonna necessarily gonna use it, but you want to know what it
yeah,
means.
yeah. I never say, yeah, it
I
depends how
never
it
use it
suits,
either.
I wouldn't say je suis avec mon daron, I say je suis avec mon père.
I'm not that cool.
But no,
Ouais.
but people will use it. And, I mean, I've heard people say c'était godin for c'était dingue.
Yeah.
And it took me a second, and I thought, okay, right, that's what. But yeah, even in the kind of synonyms and things like that you can have for words, you learn manger, but there's not just manger. There's grignoter and things like that. There's grailler.
Yeah.
There's other ways of speaking, and then there's expressions to that. J'ai faim, j'ai la dalle,
Yeah.
or il y a rien à faire, il y a que dalle à faire, and you can kind of create these synonyms and things that you hear. Super bien, archi bien, so it's all about synonyms and how you want to interact on those levels. One of those will do. You don't need to use all of them, but
Right.
again, it depends how.
The more you
Yeah.
know. Yeah, absolutely.
Mm.
I know, I always tell people, I always tell people becoming fluent is a work in process, really. So people ask me, how long is it going to take me to become fluent? I'm like, it's not like I'm not going to say after 6 months and then overnight, boom, you're fluent. So
Mm.
how long would you say it took you, based on what, to feel like you were fluent enough so you would consider yourself fluent, like you were comfortable?
Good question. And I like that as well. I mean, when I've tutored people in the past, they would say, um, often people that have never learned a language would say, like, I just want to be conversationally fluent. I hate that term. I hate it with a passion because it doesn't exist. There's no such. If you're conversationally fluent,
You're fluent.
you are 100% fluent.
Yeah.
Conversation is one of the hardest things you can do in a language. Like, that's the language. So I always say, you could be at a restaurant and you say, with your kind of British accent, je voudrais du poulet, s'il vous plaît. Well, that's your conversationally learnt kind of French, but then they're going to say, OK, ce serait avec quoi du coup? Parce qu'en fait, on a they're not with your they're not in line with your conversational French. So I always say learn a language to the best you possibly can. If you keep going, amazing, you're going to get to fluency. If you stop before, that's the level you have.
Yeah.
But there's no kind of conversational, I would say. But yeah, that's interesting. So I mean, when are you fluent? um, and people define fluency differently. I would say for me, fluency is when you can, I think it was, I'm not sure if it was Benny Lewis or someone, another polyglot said, it's kind of like when you can have a beer with someone and not feel like you're having to make any allowances for the fact that they are not a native.
Hmm.
Which doesn't mean that you don't make mistakes, right? But it means that in a slightly loud environment or something like that, you can have a conversation and be relaxed and not feel like you have to make too many allowances based on how you speak or vice versa. So I would say with French, that probably came midway through my gap year, especially going to the
Okay.
show.
Pretty quickly
Um,
then. Yeah.
yeah, I think so. It was slow, and then suddenly it clicked.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think again, just kind of false confidence, and then suddenly you're living up to that kind of false goal that you had. With Italian, again, because I was trying to speak to people as much as possible, a bit more gradually, but again, probably, yeah, even without going to Italy, I think I reached that point. And the same with Portuguese, without stepping foot in Portugal, I think I reached that point because you create an artificial um, environment of immersion. So, people can go to France and be technically immersed, but not at all because they're hanging out with English people all the time, and not doing any French, like the people you said that you knew after 20 years that don't speak because they never speak. But I think if you're starting from scratch and you put some time into it, consistency, like the gym, like anything, it's not 4 hours and then nothing for a week. 10 minutes a day over 2 years is huge.
Right.
I think you can get to a point where you can have conversations and understand things and kind of stay in French, your kind of French brain. I think you can reach that, I would say, 6 months or so.
Yep.
I've tutored people before, where they went from zero to our lessons were in full French. We were talking about movies. He was using slang, and all this kind of stuff after 6 months,
Yeah.
depending on how much you put into it.
Right. Right. And what you said at the beginning reminds me of something I tell people is that in my course, I don't like the lesson that you usually see, at the doctor's office or at the restaurant, because I keep saying, well, you can learn to say things, but you cannot
Yeah.
control what the other person's going to say. And they're not going to say what's
Mhm.
in your textbook. They say,
Yeah.
oh, je vais prendre votre température. I mean, there's always going to be something else. And from that
Yeah.
perspective, I'm thinking, you just learn French,
Yeah.
not just a specific situation where you order a glass because the waiter is gonna crack a joke, and I mean they're gonna say
Yeah.
something sarcastic, and then you're gonna,
Hmm.
It's not in the script.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they're not there. They're not on the same conversational French as you. They're fully French. Yeah, I completely agree. Um, and yeah, I think like those different situations, like at the doctor's, at the dentist, and you can learn specific vocab based on those things, sure. And depending on how good your memory is, I'm sure if you learnt it, you'd maybe retain 10% of it, and that's great. It will, flick back into your head at some point in the future, and you'll remember the word for, whatever it might be, les amygdales, or whatever, But that one's actually a good example, because those bits of vocab that you learn in those situations, if there's no context, it's going to be difficult to remember them. I'm a big, proponent of language in context, and you can create that context artificially.
Mhm.
Um, and like I said, amygdala, tonsils, right? Well, when I was in France, I had tonsillitis in angine. I still remember. I remember the where I was when I learned that word. I had tonsillitis, and I thought I've got to get myself to a doctor's. It's going to be in French. I need to know how to say tonsils, tonsillitis, avaler to swallow, and all these different things. And he said a few more words I hadn't heard before, like comprimé and different bits and bobs. But I only had to look at those words maybe two times, and 6 years later I still remember them because I remember being in that doctor's office with my throat dying and
Right.
being nervous and sweating and all that kind of stuff. It's the emotional responses you have to things. So, you know, um, I wouldn't worry too much. I kind of classify how much language I need to know. So sometimes in Portuguese, I remember last year with my girlfriend, she would I would ask a word and she would say things, and I would be like, no, I don't need to know that. That's not something I need to know right now. I don't need to know that word. I
Mhm.
don't need to know how to say to sneeze yet. And then I know that actually now, yeah, what is the word for to sneeze? Okay, I'm in sneeze level, and then it will be on, and it is funny. You kind of group things as well. You group different words, and if you learn several languages, you can compare as well. You're like, oh, I'm at sneeze level because I know what sneeze is in this language, and that I'm at that level now, and
Yeah.
you kind of group it that way. Um, yeah, but yeah, context really helps, and you can create that artificially, or by doing stuff, especially in the country. Go and do things. Get out of your house. Go to a concert. Go to a language meet. Go to the hairdressers or whatever. Do things, and try and look up some of the vocab for those things, and it will stick in 10 times more.
Right. That's
Um,
true. That makes sense. Yeah, absolutely. I have, yeah, a few questions that are really strictly related to the language. Well, that's what we've been doing, but still.
yeah.
Can you give me off the top of your head, like your top five favorite words in French?
Oh, that's a great question. Gosh, I love the ones that kind of work with sounds. Like I love barba papa,
Ba,
just
ba,
because
ba.
it's like a ba 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 ba.
And so we have
Another one
different
like
words in the US and in England, if I'm not mistaken.
yeah, yeah, yeah. You
Cotton
guys
candy
have
in the US and what do you call it?
yeah, candy floss here.
Candy
Yeah,
floss.
candy
I
floss and
say
cotton
floss, I
candy.
think of
Yeah, yeah,
flossing my teeth, but so.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, and other sounds like that, like rembobiner. Like it's kind
Rembobiné.
yeah, I don't know, I just like those kind of sounds.
It's
Um,
interesting because
but
rembobiné really came from the time of tapes. Because bobine is
yeah, absolutely. La bobine, like the
it's
coil.
rewind. It's rewind, but it's
Yeah,
really
yeah,
comes
yeah,
from the tape. Well, if you
yeah,
don't
yeah,
are
yeah,
dealing with a tape, it's going to be faire
yeah,
retour rapide, and that applies
yeah,
to any device really.
yeah. Yeah,
Okay,
true.
rembobiné. Funny.
Yeah, gosh, I can't think. I think I like expression things like the quand même, like
Quand même.
when those things that you figure out when like using quoi at the end of a sentence, like
Yeah.
c'était génial quoi, or c'était pas mal quoi, things like that you just
Can easily be
remember
bobiné.
that when you kind of figured it out, those kind of things I quite like. I'm not sure if I have any other favorites that spring to mind. I guess like yeah, just the words that you suddenly remember and think, oh, I'm quite proud of remembering that completely
Yeah.
random word. Um, yeah, like
As a French teacher,
échafaudage.
oh, échafaudage.
Échafaudage.
And I
Yeah.
remember when I learned that word in English, uh,
Mm.
scaffolding, is it what it is?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Scaffolding.
I was thinking, how am I going to remember that? I barely know what it's about. And sometimes I know
hmm
things, I memorize words. I don't even know what they are really. But
hmm
I want to know because I've heard that word in French so many times. But yeah, I was thinking, I don't know how I'll remember that. For some reason, it's stuck in English because I really wanted to learn. But yeah.
hmm
Um, and okay,
hmm
as a French teacher, what would be the most overrated lesson that you had to teach? And you kind of have to sometimes because it's there and you have to, but you really think it's a bit of a waste of time. I mean, not complete waste, but it should really not be a priority.
Oh my gosh.
So many.
You see, that's interesting. Ah, where do I start? Yeah. I mean, yeah, because it's hard because I teach French in a prep school so a prep school is like a private school for boys up to the age of about 14. Some of whom are, so they're quite young, but some of whom are very kind of gifted. They're going for scholarships for, Eton and Harrow and those kind of top schools. So the syllabus can be kind of more like A level at the top end, but then at the bottom end, it's obviously not. But the way that I learn language isn't necessarily the way that I teach to a class
Right,
because I would love to spend 10 hours looking at grammar tables, but a 10-year-old probably doesn't.
right,
And they have a time limit and exams and things. So they have to learn things different ways. So you kind of have to get through syllabus. And I inject my ways of learning I kind of sneak them into the syllabus.
right.
But yeah, I mean, they go through all the vocab topics and things like that. I mean, there are words all the different animals and things like that. I mean, I think one of them stick insect. Why am I teaching what a stick insect is? I don't know why that was on the syllabus. Um, yeah, there are some really tricky, adjectival agreements. One of those ones that is the bane of the lives of all French learners as kids in schools. Adjective agreements because we don't have it in English. It's so tricky
Right.
for them, and there's so many things to learn. You add an E for feminine, S for plural,
Yeah.
but you don't know when it's feminine or when it's plural because you have to learn those words as well. And then also you might have some that are irregular. Blanc goes to blanche. Violette, you add another T. And then, some don't change at all. Marron, orange, because they're
Right.
nouns technically. And it's a complete minefield. So teaching that, I think that the way they do in schools, I think is far too much. I mean, if you speak and you say, la baguette est grand instead of grande, might be a bit jarring, but it's not the end of the world. Like adjective agreements, sometimes I think
Right.
there are other things you can put your focus on too.
Right.
Um, yeah, than just conjugations and adjective agreements.
Yeah. I mean,
Um,
sometimes I think of even other rules like duquel, à laquelle. Because when I went through
oh
those lessons in my
gosh.
course, it was even hard for me to come up with examples. And I
Hmm
mean, and
hmm
it means that we don't use it as
hmm
often as you'd think.
Yeah, and that's another one as well. And I say this to classes that um, French people suck at French. Um, like, what I mean by that is that there'll be lots of spelling mistakes, and if you analyze a French person's speech, as I did at uni in France, there are loads of times. So relative pronouns, for example, when they'd say le parc que je suis allé instead of le parc où je suis allé or le parc auquel
Yeah,
je suis allé, and it's
it's
kind
important.
of wrong. But when you're speaking quickly, like the don. I always use don and I use them correctly because I know the rule. It's hard to not. Um, so la façon dont je parle or le rêve, le truc dont j'ai rêvé. That's a really good topic. I love it because I love the different rules and things like that. But teaching it to someone, um, you can understand how hard that is. Subjunctive as well is another one. Um,
It's a necessary
is
evil, though.
Yeah, it is. It is. It is. Um, yeah, completely different to it doesn't exist really in English. That is a
Right.
tricky one. I think I had to once do a lesson on the passé simple
Ah,
that I found very unhelpful. Um, I mean, there's even some passé simple that I'm not even familiar with. I don't think many French people are familiar with.
no.
You'd say, ce fut une belle journée when you're trying to be, ce fut un plaisir.
Right,
Um,
and that's about it. That's the only use of it. But
yeah,
just the other day, I was with a friend who tried to, just for fun, she tried to write an article and she tried to use passé simple. She misused, I didn't say anything,
Mm,
but she completely misused
mm,
it. It was all wrong.
yeah.
Conjugation was all wrong.
Mm.
It's really counterintuitive sometimes. Yeah.
But then again, on that point, such as is French, a 4-year-old will be able to read the passé simple, no problem,
Yeah,
because it's in children's books. And so you have this impossibly difficult topic to get your head around conjugation wise for, an adult, and yet a 3-year-old can read, Caterpillar something book and they can read it all. So,
yeah,
but they can't conjugate it. But yeah,
right, right. Yeah, absolutely.
interesting.
I think I'd like to try to finish on something. We'll see how we do. Maybe we're gonna screw it up completely, but it's worth trying.
Okay.
It's something that it's almost a game. Maybe you had the same without, and I never told anyone about it. But I was, as a kid, even I was in bed and I would just give myself a word, random word, and I would just go off tangents. Imagine you're teaching, so you give me any word, and I'll start going off tangent and teaching about based on that word. And so I want to try and do that with you because it'd be interesting. Um,
Okay.
so okay. Do you want me to start with you? I'll give you a word and you try to start teaching based off of that.
So how are you? What are you teaching based off of that? Are you
Anything
teaching
that
like a
comes to your mind that you feel like you had to learn that you learned, and then and so you go off tangents constantly. You say like
Okay,
the word
you,
leap.
you you go first. You show me how it's done.
So okay, give me a word
French or English?
in French. Let's do that in French.
Okay, word in French.
Any word.
Let's go with any word. Oh gosh, now I can't think of any words. It's impossible. Let's go with bâtiment.
Bâtiment. So bâtiment, that's the word that everybody learns in books for a building. And unfortunately, they don't learn the word immeuble, which is the word that we use more. So bâtiment is the word for administration, like a city hall, that's un bâtiment, like all those kinds of administrative buildings. But if you talk about an office building or an apartment building, it's un immeuble. Immeuble, you have the word meuble, meuble, which is a piece of furniture. We have un meuble, des meubles. In English, you have a piece of furniture or furniture as a whole. So you have meubler is to furnish an apartment or a house. Meubler. So you have appartement meublé or non meublé, furnished or unfurnished. Um, and then we can continue. That'd be interesting.
That was good. I like that.
That's what I'm talking about.
Interesting.
Because
Yeah.
again, I think very much like you. I feel like I learned every single word one by one, and I was so excited
Hmm.
to learn every single word that
Yeah.
that's why I think it's a fun game for me to do, even by
Because
myself
they
in my head.
link.
Like, okay, go come up with a tripod. Oh, there you go, tripod. I see a tripod right here. Un trépied, pied, and then foot, and then le pied
Yeah.
d'un animal, and then I can go on and on.
Faire le pied du grue,
Faire le pied gru, that's so
yeah,
interesting.
au pied de
How
la
do we come up with
montagne.
those?
Like
Faire
le pied du
gru.
lit.
What's that?
Yeah. Le pied du lit, the foot of the bed, le pied de la montagne. Yeah, the grue. A grue is a crane as well pour la construction, for
There you go. See,
construction. There
you know
you
how to
go.
do that.
I'm a natural.
I love it.
There you go.
Yeah. Yeah, a
Yeah.
crane. I remember I had to learn the word a crane in English. I thought, does it sound like a crane? Une grue does sound like it.
Mm.
But yeah, faire le pied gru, that's so weird. It's really, for those who don't know, faire le pied gru is a good fair expression, such a random one. But you'll see every now and then, let's say, Rihanna's gonna announce that she's gonna have a concert, in 6 months, and the tickets are coming out, on sale tomorrow. And then everybody at that place in Paris, people are gonna do the pied gru. They're gonna go the night before and stay overnight,
Mm.
waiting in
Hmm.
line. That's faire le pied gru.
Hmm.
Random.
Yeah.
No. But
It's like
again,
loitering in a sense. Yeah.
you might think, when am I ever gonna use it? When am I gonna hear it?
Yeah.
You just don't know. You don't know what people are gonna say.
Yeah, and that's the fun. Like, and that's a really actually a good example of why languages can be so gratifying. Because like that expression, it might sound like I've never really used that expression to my knowledge, but it just popped into my head because you said pied, and it's those moments, those snap moments that is great. And when you're in a conversation sometimes, and out of nowhere you just haul from some unknown room in your head an expression or word, and you're like, did that stick? Did that make sense? And no, everyone's going along with it, and I just used that, word for, I don't know, banister or something that I didn't know I knew. Those moments I absolutely love. Those
Yeah,
are the
yeah,
kind of moments that keep you going.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And then you have the words that the press use. That
Mm,
that's really the press that people are not necessarily going to use all the
mm.
time, but
Yeah. À
faire un
l'instar
tollé,
de.
un tollé. Ça a créé
Mm,
un tollé. It was
yeah.
it created an outrage, something like that. I don't
Yeah.
think people are going to use un tollé, ça fait un tollé. I don't think people are going to use it in conversation that much, but you'll see it in the press all the time, you know.
Yeah, there's different mannerisms and way people speak. I know, like a couple of examples when people are speaking in documentaries and things, they often use like et le roi Charles, quant à lui, blah 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 blah, things like quant à lui, quant à elle, where you'd never say that in a general conversation, like
Yeah.
or listening on the radio or the liaison. I
Yeah.
always find that so funny. Liaison on steroids, practically on the radio. It's crazy. Like, some liaison you will make, c'est important de machin, but then they say like peuvent être and things like that, which I would never use. So
And
they
again, so that
really
everyone
use every
understands,
liaison.
in the course, I explained that some liaisons are mandatory and some are optionals. They're optional. When
Mm.
they're optional, really, we won't make them in spoken French. So
Hmm.
we only make those that are mandatory in conversational French. But so ideally, it's beautiful when you hear a beautiful liaison. It sounds really beautiful. It sounds nicer than when you don't make the liaison. But the truth of the matter is that we will skip them, and it's fine, you know. But if you
Yeah.
skip the wrong one, it's going to sound awfully wrong, like the
Yeah.
worst grammar mistake. If you say, well, it can change the meaning. If you say il achète versus ils achètent, you go from he's buying,
Yeah.
they're buying. Oh,
Absolutely. Yeah,
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 yeah. Yeah, there is no difference between, yeah. And then you've got, il regarde could be they watch or he watches. But then when there's a vowel, as you say, yeah, ils achètent,
right.
il achète.
Yeah.
Um,
And then it
yeah,
doesn't mean the same thing anymore. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I had another question in mind. Are there Anglicisms that the French make that bug you? Maybe
I,
either
I,
that we've always made or that you noticed or is fairly new.
I mean, I'll have to have a think because I was thinking about this earlier on as we were talking. We were talking about slang and different things like that, and I thought, oh my gosh, massive topic of English and French is huge. I mean, but it's fake English. It's not real English. It's
Yeah,
like the Parisians that speak French, but they use different English kind of words in certain ways, and they think that they can speak English. But if you told them to say a whole sentence in English, they can't. But they've
right.
incorporated it so much. I mean, some good examples, things like faire un jogging, no, faire un footing en portant son jogging. On peut aller au pressing. Voilà, un brushing avant de sortir,
Yeah,
pour faire son happening à la télé. And that, all those different words that we don't use in English. You don't
right.
say to blow dry your hair, un brushing.
Yeah, yeah,
The
yeah.
French use that and think you do. Or le pressing, the like the laundromat or the where you get your ironing done. Again, we don't say le pressing, but
Yeah.
there are words, yeah, little words like that that annoy
And th
me.
and
And
those
what
really have always been in the language. So,
mm,
I wonder if there's anything that you've heard that you think, oh, that never heard that
oh
before, and maybe it's more
yeah.
recent.
Yeah, gosh. I mean, even things like, yeah, it can be crazy sometimes in Paris. I remember I was at the airport and I heard this guy on the phone saying, il faut que tu call me back.
Oh,
For
there
you
you
have to
go.
call me back.
There you go.
And
Yeah,
it's like
I've never
it's
heard
it's
that.
it's
Not
it's like a
surprised.
fashion trend.
Yeah, it
It's
is.
just like it's almost showing off that and little ones like prendre un drink,
Yeah.
things like that, which are a little bit, yeah, which I would, would it denotes a certain kind of way of speaking. It could be a class thing, it could be, um, yeah.
And so that brings me to something else. I don't know if we mentioned it last time we talked, but this book that I read by a British guy that was so insightful and funny, and at the same time it was called Un an dans la merde, 1 year in the merde. Stephen
Hmm.
um, Stephen Clark. And
Hmm.
so there's one line that stayed with me. And it's the guy was so good at describing the French just from spending 1 year. And at some point he said, inside of all French people, there's a little child who just would love to be American, but he won't admit it.
Yeah.
Do you ever
Yeah.
feel that with
Yeah, I think so. I think, that's why all, shops in France, they've always got that English title, and you've just got to look at people like Johnny Hallyday and the fact that he kind of presented himself as the kind of French Elvis, but that he was, his, that tagline that he was born in America. when he wasn't, and no one in outside of France knew who he was, and but that kind of represented the fact that yeah, everyone they always want to be that. Yeah, there's a little American boy inside of every. I love that. That's so true. Um,
Definitely.
yeah, there's a lot of English terms they'll use,
Or
especially in the
even,
streets as well, like serial killer and things like that, and like
yeah.
just
Oh,
odd kind of things. Or je suis hard,
ouais.
like
Or why is it that when they talk about British or American celebrity, they all of a sudden, instead of say copain, petit ami, they say c'est son boyfriend. Why?
yeah, yeah,
I find it so
yeah, yeah,
annoying.
yeah. Hmm.
Son
Yeah, yeah,
boyfriend.
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's almost like it's a bit of a flex that they can also say know the word in English. That's also another thing to kind
Yeah.
of show off slightly your knowledge of English. And then
Yeah.
it's also culture. I mean, you just have to look at a film that's based around a school in France, and just the kids speaking to each other. You will hear English words all the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and it's not almost showing off in that sense. It's just cool. It's just cool
Yeah.
for them to use some of those words. Um,
I
yeah,
heard
yeah,
I
definitely
heard someone
accents.
told me two different things for the same thing. I was talking to a friend that I grew up with in Paris, and she said, bah, je te le dis ASAP. And it took me a few seconds to realize what she was saying. I didn't expect it. I'll tell you
Yeah,
ASAP.
yeah, yeah,
ASAP.
yeah. That's brilliant.
Je te le dis ASAP. I think she said ASAP another day. She said, je te le dis ASAP. Like, whoa. Okay.
Or there's like I remember ones I noticed as well when they say "What's the fuck?"
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
then when and that's not even like a necessary modern. That's like it's so ingrained now into French that it's almost like they don't. I wouldn't consider that almost an Anglicism. That's almost like a French term now. What's the fuck? And also the other one saying what at the end of a sentence. And it's funny because I'm English, you would think I would say that with an English accent, but you can't because you're speaking French.
Right.
So I end up butchering my own language speaking French. It's terrible. So I'd be like, et du coup, enfin, il m'a dit ça, j'étais là en mode, mais what? De quoi tu parles? Like, and I'd say, what? Like a,
What?
and like, mais j'étais là en mode, mais what the fuck? Genre, and it's, yeah, it's, you have
And
to
those are
butcher
things
English
that
in order to speak French.
those are things that are probably very new because I
Mm,
noticed the what the fuck and the WTF in
mm,
French texts,
mm,
but I didn't grow up with that. Nobody would know what that was.
mm,
So I think it
mm,
came along with
mm.
the internet, probably.
Yeah. Yeah, and even yeah, even on a less slangy level, things like un job, you can say boulot, you can say un taf, you can say un travail, un emploi, loads of different terms, but often people would, could use job or and then you've got l'Académie Française that tries to banish all Anglicisms and, purify the language and there's a reason why, because there's so much of it used.
Yeah,
Mm.
but there's not much they can do really. I mean, you can't really control the way people speak. Yeah.
No, you can't, no. Yeah.
Ok, très très bien. Well, thank you so much. Merci vraiment d'avoir passé un peu plus d'une heure avec moi. It was fascinating stuff. I'm sure we'd have much more to talk about, and
Yeah.
maybe that would be for another session. Mais
Yeah.
merci
Ce fut
beaucoup.
un plaisir.
Pas de problème.
Mhm.
Ok. À très
It was
bientôt.
great.
Salut.
À bientôt. Merci beaucoup, Alex. Ouais, on a abordé pas mal de choses. Et
Ouais.
quand on a changé de piste et tout, ouais, finalement, il y avait des trucs voilà, auxquels je pensais et tout. Et puis, j'ai oublié. Et après, genre comme l'anglais dans le français, par exemple, j'avais oublié ça. Je me disais, ah, ce serait intéressant d'en parler. Puis, tu l'as déterré à la fin.